Everybody, welcome to this podcast, Peace Building with Hannah Jewell. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about ideas that help us transition into a peaceful future. There's so many good things happening, and when we come together and we contribute to the conversation, our ideas and our inspirations and the fire of our hearts grows through that interaction. And so the purpose of this is to grow that heart fire between us and to share thoughts and to inspire each other to that better, more peaceful future we are all moving towards. Today I'm here with my cameraman Carl. There'll be guests on the podcast eventually, but for this first one it's Carl and I. And Carl, would you like to say hello?
Hi guys. Yeah, Hannah, tell us about what inspires you.
I am inspired by the journey of unfolding of the heart. If there's one thing that the essence of my vibration carries, it is the beauty of the heart and the essence of love within that deep connection to love. So everything I do is inspired from that source.
Lovely. Tell us a bit about your story.
My story has been a story of deep healing. Like many of us, I was born into this era, this epoch of time, into a family situation and a life that simply required I needed to seek out healing. And I did that through many ways. First, I discovered dance and theater and expression. Later, I discovered body work and energy work, and I began to rewire my nervous system. And then finally, I discovered deep spiritual paths in both Sufism and shamanism. And that coming home of the soul is, I feel, my purpose for existence on earth, and most likely yours and many of us.
Thank you. Can you tell us about leadership?
Yeah, so today we're talking about leadership. And leadership for me is a constant question. Like, how do we move into this period of transition together where a different kind of leadership structure begins to take place and holds us? And as I contemplate this question, I land in the idea of soft leadership. And soft leadership comes from my inquiry into what it is to be a woman and lead as a woman. And soft leadership is exemplified for me in the essence of the spiritual women of the past whose names have been forgotten or whose stories have been buried. And one of the women that I really relate to at the moment is Fatima, the wife of Ali, from Sufism and from Islam. And Fatima, she understood the mystery of womanhood. I imagine her in a black scarf, a black veil studded with diamonds, which are stars. Like the essence of stars and mystery and night is within her. But she is sharp as a hawk, and nothing misses her gaze. And she is joyful. There is a river of joy moving in her. And this combination of watchfulness, precision, inner joy, and receptivity exemplifies to me soft leadership. We allow the journey of others to unfold around us, and we hold that center line so clearly, and we do it with joy.
So, Hannah, can you tell me something about Rock Woman?
Yeah, thank you, Carl, for asking. Rock Woman comes from the first medicine journey that I experienced. And in this journey, I became a boulder, a rock. And as this rock, I held the memory of time within me. And as woman, I hold the memory of time within my bones, the memory of generations past. And as that rock, light was able to anchor through me. And what this taught me is that steadiness and receptivity are a foundation. And this is really different from a way of displaying a foundation, so to speak. It's holding what I call quiet power or soft power, which is the strength of mountains. It is not soft in the sense of weak. It is soft in the sense of presence and allowing, to allow that stillness to be within oneself. Rock woman also relates to women who hold nations. So going back to Fatima, her partner, Ali, was the ecstatic dimension of Islam. He is the one who really brought the practices of music and of whirling and of moving into ecstasy and trance to the community there. He anchored that in his being. And if we want to have community joy, dance, ecstatic, devotional connection to spirit in our selves, in our families, and in our new structures, then we really actually need rocks, boulders, rock women to hold that steady ground and allow that expression and unfolding.
So can you tell us how soft leadership relates to the current leadership paradigm?
Oh, yes, thank you for asking. So the way I see the current leadership paradigm is that it's rigid, hierarchical, and that there's a ladder. And the ladder you ascend step by step by step, and it requires effort, and it requires proper kind of connection, and it doesn't have much to do with who you are inside and the presence that you carry. And this ladder is so rigid and so fixed, and if you don't follow it, then there's punishment. It's punitive. So that as a current, outdated and old paradigm of leadership, we can see is ascending, rigid, and punitive, whereas a soft leadership is not something that you climb to achieve. It's something that emerges naturally from within a group. And leadership in this way means there's not only one leader, it means there's multiple leaders, so that as I emerge in my role of leadership, for instance, bringing spiritual technologies and ideas about harmony and work with the body into the picture, other people will emerge in their areas of leadership. And that means that we're not in competition, we actually complement each other. And so the new form of leadership has collaboration at its core, and it has friendship at its core. The more I think about this, the more I understand that joy is part of the new way of leadership, because who I want to see around me are people who are so good at what they do and who have such amazing hearts that I want to see them shine and lift them up. And then they feel the same about me. And so leadership is something we share.
Could you talk a little about sovereignty?
Sovereignty is so important a concept. And when I first started to think about sovereignty, I was looking it up. To be sovereign is to reign and to rule. And the way I'm beginning to understand sovereignty is that we don't reign or rule over others, but actually that we stand in the queen or the king space of our own being. And so each one of us in sovereignty is our own queen and our own king. We could talk about this in another way, like in Sufism, they say we engage the spiritual struggle not against the outside world, but within our own selves. And this brings us to a place of refinement and maturity. So sovereignty is to be in a place of maturity, and that is a leap in consciousness for humanity. We have not lived in our recent decades and thousands of years as people who collectively undergo processes of emotional maturity. That aspect kind of got forgotten, of initiation and of the necessary beauty and power of refining ourselves. And when I think about sovereignty more, I think about a tree. And this metaphor of the tree is really powerful because it's like these roots go deep, deep, deep into the earth and they anchor. And that earth that they anchor into is knowledge. It's knowledge of the self, it's knowledge of the planet, and it's something that we can really move into and wrap those roots around to hold us steady. Then as we're rooted in knowledge, we have this trunk that rises and these branches are anything but rigid. They sway in the wind, and the leaves dance and they flutter and they express the joy of life. They flower and they fruit, and these trees provide shelter. And so if I am a sovereign individual, I'm rooted in my own self-knowledge in order to be the queen of myself. Yet I am expansive, providing shade for those around me and moving in joy with all of creation.
Amazing. You've talked before about beehives. How does that relate to this concept?
Wonderful, Carl. Thank you for bringing that up. The beehive is this amazing structure, geometrical structure, where the honeycomb is created and it ever expands. And so it's infinite. The hive can grow as much as is needed to support the bees within it. And then the queen bee is anything but the kind of ruler who's punitive. The queen bee lives a life of complete sacrifice. Every breath, every movement is for the benefit of the hive as a whole, and she does nothing for herself. So if we take this idea of a hive and we apply it to our potential new structures of leadership and of community, of education, then we might see that there is infinite scope to include all beings and all personality types and all that is needed, and that if each one of us acts as our own queen bee and we live in service to the greater whole, we're naturally making decisions that create a cooperative structure.
So Hannah, it might be difficult for some people to imagine they're a queen bee or a king or a queen. Could you say a little more about this and talk about identity?
Yeah, thank you, Carl. Identity is a really huge concept. And as I investigate the idea of sovereignty and what that means to live as a sovereign being, I come up against identity again and again. And identity for me has to do with how we relate to the other and to the world around us. So if we imagine that hive again, it eventually does have a boundary, and that edge and that boundary is where the bees come and go. And in permaculture, that would be called like the fertile place. That's where different plants would mix and merge and new things happen. And humans are like this too. When we engage with other people, then our edges meet, and that is the fertile place where new life is born. if we don't have those meeting points, we can become stagnant or rigid and lean back into those old structures again, where we're continually meeting the edges of other beings, other people, other cultures. Our identity is continually emergent. It's continually being born again and again and again. And that brings me to the topic of borders and edges and culture. So right now, in the old paradigm, we identify as a nation. We identify as a race, and we identify as a particular set of people with a set of beliefs and political structures, etc. I see that way is falling to the wayside slowly, little by little, and that our new way of relating in new structures of leadership has more to do with a lack of borders. So there's no imaginary lines that you need a passport to cross. There's no imaginary categorizations about is your love of God the same as my love of God? Actually, we meet in that place of love on the edge of our beings, and we say that center that we actually share a love of God is enough. Or that place where we meet on the edge of a sea or a river or a landscape is the place where our fertilizations grow. It's not the place where we need a passport stamp. It's a place where we meet. And within that culture is how we share. So we share through music, through song, through dance, through storytelling, in these permaculture rhizomatic edges that are the new frontier of being and existing and belonging. We meet through the arts, and so identities are actually shaped and crafted through the arts. And the arts are once again a holistic thing. The arts of the fine arts, the arts of the knowledge of the earth, the arts of the knowledge of our sciences, our astronomies, our medical cures. All of these arts mix, and from this we can form identities centered around vision. And people will begin to gather related to a vision shared for how to heal, a vision shared for how to build, a vision shared for how to sing. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. Yeah, thank you. I know you love Rumi. Would you like to read us a Rumi poem whilst we're here?
I do. And for those of you who don't know Rumi, he is a Sufi who was a very learned scholar, and then his heart had an incredible opening. And as part of his journey of unfolding and opening, he became ecstatic to the point where he was doing the whirling dance of Sufis that you may have seen from time to time, everywhere. And people started to gather around him. And as he whirled, he spoke. And that speech came out in poetry. And it's a very magnetic and rich poetry because he's got this lineage of scholarship and these years of being a scholar behind him, but it's coming out in this ecstatic way. So there's so much we can learn from Rumi. And the poem that I want to read today is about unity, because fundamentally all this talk on rhizomes and beehives and leadership and sovereignty is a reflection of our movement towards unity as a species. Like, that's why we need new structures. The ones aren't working because we are moving towards a place of unity, almost whether we like it or not, you know. So, the sun, which is spirit, became separated into rays by the windows, which are bodies. When you gaze on the sun's disk, it is one. But whoever is screened by the perception of bodies is in some doubt. Plurality is the animal spirit. The human spirit is one essence. Inasmuch as God shared his light upon humanity, human beings are essentially one. In reality, his light never separated. And that's from the Mathnavi, Book 2, verses 186 to 189, for those of you who study Sufism. And for me, this really relates so deeply to the one human heart that I feel. We are individuals, we are prisms of light, each one of us a unique manifestation of qualities, and yet we are one within that sun or that heart of love, that heart of God. Depending on your persuasion, you can say God or love or the sun, but we're rooted in that oneness. And that oneness is the fire and the breath and the life which moves through us. And we're starting to remember that and wake up. So each of us is sovereign, a sovereign prism and reflection of God's light. But we are one in that beat of our heart, one in that light.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, Hannah, what are you going to do with this podcast?
So that's a really good question. With this podcast, I'll be bringing my own strengths to the table, and these strengths have to do with embodied spirituality, which means working through the body and its processes, its systems of fluids and bones and memory, its nerves, its emotions and its thoughts, the many ways of entering through the body toward health and toward maturity. And then I bring to that the spiritual process as well, where we come into spiritual refinement. So body, mind, emotion, spirit in a unified field of health and beauty and harmony. That's what I'm bringing to the table. And I realize that that's one incredible place to stand, but it's only one part of the picture in terms of how do we transition. And so I'm going to be bringing in other people who can talk about, for example, permaculture, eco-design, cooperation, herbalism, other ways of healing, other ideas, so that we create a fertile place of edges and our ideas can flower and create a sustainable future and a peaceful future and a future where we're all healthy together. We need each other in this moment. And the people who I'll be bringing in are local people, because there's people I admire all over the world and I read and I listen to, but when I seek in my heart, I know that our communities spring up out of local interaction. And so right here in my community, I'm going to be bringing local experts, local people, individuals who have their own fertile bed of knowledge and inspiration and love to share. And that really excites me. And may our local community grow and be an inspiration for whoever is listening to this all over the world, and the growth and the beauty you're going to create in your own communities.
Beautiful. That sounds very exciting. Can you tell us a bit more about the tools and ideas that you'll be bringing to those conversations with those people?
Yes, it's going to be such a fantastic adventure of our sharing and our meeting. And one of the things that I intend to bring to every conversation is the understanding of different spiritual tools, or we sometimes call them technologies. Technologies are things that assist us, and these are technologies that assist us in our spiritual growth and refinement. And these include practices, like whirling, which we've talked about, prayer, fasting, different ways of chanting and mantra. And these are so vital to include in our conversations on practical matters and on healthcare, because they just step up the whole game to another level, and they help us to integrate. And if we're going to really make these transitions, then we need to do that as integrated beings from a holistic place. So these spiritual technologies, I feel, will help us all to do that step change and that evolution together.
Thank you, Hannah. That's amazing. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yes, this podcast is intended to go out about once a month right now. Let's see how it flows. And I really thank you for taking the time to listen to it. It's my desire that there's an interaction here. So if there are certain things that you have questions about and you want me to speak to, I invite you to write to me and I'll bring those up. And you can write to me, Hannah at hannahjewelofpeace.com. The link will be in the description. And if you are local to my area in Sussex, in the UK, and you feel like you would like to share on this podcast, and you've got something that really meets those edges of what I'm bringing, then please get in contact with me. I'd love to hear from you. Again, you can write to me. You can go to my website, hannahjewelofpeace.com, and you can check out the different things I offer, get more of a feel for me, and let's talk and figure out the fertile ground of the edges and grow some flowers together. Thank you so much for joining Peace Building with Hannah Jewel, and I so look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.